Good morning and welcome to Morning Joe right here on the Are You Serious Sports Network on Facebook Live, on Twitch TV, and on Twitter. I'm Jonah Malkin with you every single Monday and Wednesday morning from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 to 11 Central, and 8 to 9 a.m. Pacific. Thank you so much for joining me on a lovely Wednesday morning. Lots to discuss today. Dodgers dominate game one against the Rays in the World Series. Some recaps in the NFL. Chiefs win. Cowboys blunder. My top 10 teams in the NFL is coming up in about 25 to 30 minutes, and then you're not going to want to miss it. My college football insider, Ben Cross, is going to be joining the show not too long from now. So make sure to stick around for all of that. And then, of course, I got a great Malkin's Moments for you every single end of the show. So thank you so much for joining me and making Are You Serious Sports Network a part of your Monday and Wednesday morning. So Dodgers, huge win, dominant performance in game one. Kershaw was fantastic. This was so happy to see. And listen, these were the two best teams in the MLB all season. Dodgers in the NL with the best record, 43-17. And the Rays, the best record in the AL, 40-20. And it's so interesting how the past two matchups for the Dodgers and the Rays, for that matter, they haven't faced each other in the postseason or in the regular season. Dodgers hadn't faced the Braves, and now the Dodgers haven't faced the Rays. And again, so many interesting storylines coming into this matchup. Andrew Friedman, the GM for the Dodgers, was the GM of the Rays back in 2008. The last time that these two teams, or rather, the last time that Andrew Friedman was a GM for the team was with the Rays in 2008. Now he's with the Dodgers. So the pitching battles, how was Kershaw going to come out? And this was the question mark, right? Dave Roberts gave Clayton Kershaw the ball in game one and said, okay, this is an opportunity to redeem yourself. And we know the struggles. We've chronicled the struggles for Clayton Kershaw. For his career, Kershaw came into last night in the regular season with a 2.43 ERA. In the postseason, that number would spike to over 4.7 ERA. Huge disparity between the regular season and the postseason. And his postseason record, only 12-12 overall. So we know this guy struggles. And for him to come out in game one, pitch nearly a perfect game, 6 complete innings, only gave up 2 hits, 1 run, 1 home run in the 5th inning. And for him to then deal, 8 strikeouts, only 1 walk, 1.5 ERA today or last night. He was spectacular. And I'm just so happy for him that the storyline and the narrative could shift a little bit because he's just taken so much flack. And again, last year was warranted, comes into relief in the top of the 7th inning against the Nationals, gives up back-to-back home runs in the top of the 8th inning. Oh, unfortunately, that lost us the game. Lost the Dodgers the game. We know his struggles in the 2016 World Series against the Astros. Now we know why. We have some clarification as to why that is. So I was happy to see him perform. And again, this is the dominant performance we were expecting to see from the Dodgers the entire postseason. We saw it really one time against the Braves in that Game 3 win, 11 runs in the 1st inning. And this is why the Dodgers paid Mookie Betts and traded for him. 12 years, $300 million. This was why. The guy had 3 stolen bases, a home run. That tag from third home off the base hit, or really off the fielder's choice in the bottom of the 5th inning to score home off that jump. I don't think many other players could have scored home. The lightning speed from Mookie Betts to run from third to home to avoid the tag home. The throw from Yandy Diaz was right on the money, maybe just a half a second too late, and Betts steals home. And that was a 2-1 game, kind of hanging in the balance. Rays were sticking around. And it's impressive that Mookie Betts was able to get a fantastic jump, dive forward, avoid the tag. This is why you traded for him. It's not only the defensive plays, which we've seen time and time again, robbing numerous home runs, especially in this postseason, but it's being able to steal bases, be able to make the offense easier for you. He can impact this team in so many other ways than just hitting. He had a walk last night. He's got 9 walks for this postseason. This postseason, he's batting .327, above .400 on-base percentage, above a .500 slug percentage, 16 hits. Yeah, it's only 1 home run, but this guy impacts the game in so many different ways. You think a guy like Manny Machado can steal from third home? No, that's why the Dodgers didn't pay for a guy like that. You think Bryce Harper can produce like this in the postseason? No, we've seen it. He hasn't been able to do that. That's why they haven't given him those mega deals. And so when you look at this Dodgers team, this is why you trade for a guy like Mookie Betts. And this is going to be a special year because, again, it would be serendipitous if the Dodgers won this year, because the last time the Dodgers won this year, won the MLB and won the World Series was in 1988. That season was the same year and was the most recent example of when the Dodgers and the Lakers won their championships together in the same year, was in 1988, the last time the Dodgers won the World Series. So it would be serendipitous if the Dodgers could win. And you got production from Max Muncy, 2 for 4, 2 RBIs. Chris Taylor, 2 for 3, an RBI. The team batted .340. And again, the Dodgers used to be like the Rays. They used to rely strictly on the home run ball. And now you look at a team like the Rays, who this postseason have scored 70% of their runs off of home runs. That used to be the Dodgers recipe. But now they're able to play a little bit more small ball. They're not relying so heavily on that one-hit wonder. They're able to deliver and produce 3 back-to-back singles in the bottom of the 5th to bring Betts, to bring Seager, to bring Muncy home. This is what they can do. This is why they're so versatile. This is why they're so good. And I'm hopeful, guys, that game 2 is tonight. Then there's a day off break, 3 straight games, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I'm hoping that I can pop out another bottle of Prosecco to bring to you guys for a Monday morning celebration. I'm hoping that happens. If that doesn't happen, then I'll probably just have to wait either till Wednesday, which I surely hope, because Tuesday would be game 6. And if they couldn't close it out, there'd be a game 7 on Monday or on Wednesday. But this would be special. This would be special. So hopefully we can celebrate this win, because this would be just fantastic. Jordan Taylor, morning salute. Absolutely, brother. Morning salute to you too as well. And let's see who else commented. Jacob Perillo, top of the morning to you again. Appreciate you being a part of Morning Joe, making Are You Serious Sports part of your Wednesday morning. Again, Morning Joe right here on the Are You Serious Sports Network, on Facebook Live, on Twitch TV, and on Twitter every Monday and Wednesday morning, 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 to 11 Central, and 8 to 9 a.m. Pacific. Okay. Shifting from the MLB to the NFL, couple big games on Monday. Don't want to talk about this too long, but I did want to highlight something that's interesting about the Chiefs, right? I talked about this in week 1. This team is very versatile. They're very multifaceted, multidimensional. This is not a one-dimensional football team. And this is why, and I'm going to preview my top 10 teams coming up around the corner in about 10 minutes. This is why they're so difficult to beat. When they can run the football like they did with Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who everyone kind of jumped off his bandwagon. We all thought that he jumped off a cliff. Okay, when they can run the football, this team's not going to be beaten. You let the Chiefs have the time of possession 37 minutes in inclement weather at Buffalo, and Patrick Mahomes wasn't anything that special. He was very efficient, 21 of 26, 227 yards, 2 touchdowns. But the element of this team that makes them so difficult, and it's this championship pedigree, it's this championship characteristic that I've talked about for several weeks now. Can you win in a myriad of ways? Can you win using different styles? And so far, the Chiefs have demonstrated an ability to do that. Again, just when you think that you figured the Chiefs out, you say to yourself, okay, we're going to limit the air attack. We're going to get pressure on Mahomes. They can run the football. We've seen 2 examples of this so far this year where they're running the football extremely well. Week 1 against the Texans, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, 28 carries, 138 rushing yards. And now in week 6 against the Bills, he went off for 26 carries, 161 yards. And when they can establish the run, and now you add in a vet like Le'Veon Bell, who you're probably getting for the cheap. We thought this offense was already about as explosive as it could be with Travis Kelce, with Tyreek Hill, Mecole Hardman, Sammy Watkins. This team is loaded. And Damian Williams isn't even there. And Clyde Edwards-Helaire steps in. Now you add in a former top 5, top 3 running back in Le'Veon Bell, who's kind of looking to shift the narrative and the perception of himself as a player and as a teammate. And he's joining the reigning defending champions. Now, credit to Clyde Edwards-Helaire for saying, hold on, coach, you're not going to sub me out just yet. I still deserve to be the starting running back, and he did. He earned his stripes in that example right there. But again, what's impressive is that they didn't rely on Mahomes too heavily to be this Houdini to rub a genie out of the bottle every single time. They didn't rely on his Herculean efforts. He was great. He was efficient. Again, 21, 26, 227 yards, but a very balanced attack. And that's why I want to give so much credit to Andy Reid and Eric Bieniemy, the offensive coordinator, because they drew up such a balanced game plan. 245 rushing yards, 221 passing yards. 10 first downs through the air, 15 first downs on the ground. 9 for 14 on third down, 1 for 1 on fourth down. So you're looking at efficiency. And then occasionally, when you needed Mahomes to make some plays with his legs, he was able to do that. But you didn't have to rely on his heroics. And that's what I'm impressed by, is he doesn't have to be spectacular every single time, and yet the opposing team always has to be. They always have to be spectacular. And what we're starting to see is this evolution in Mahomes' game and in the trust that they show towards the rest of the players, towards the other team. Because this is just going to make them so much dangerous now, because you can't just hone in just on Mahomes, especially when the run game is as effective as it is. They average 6.4 yards per carry. 6.4 yards per carry, 6.4 yards per play. 37 minutes of time of possession. That's special. And the truth of the matter is, you're not going to beat this team if you allow them to hold on to the football for that long. Speaking of holding on to the football and not doing it at the most optimal level, let's talk about the Dallas Cowboys, shall we? Whoa. Don't get me wrong. I know that Dak Prescott is the leader. I know that he's the captain of this team, and it was such a devastating and gruesome injury that he suffered. And I recognize that. Here's what I don't like. You have all these players coming out saying, like Ezekiel Elliott, you're going to dedicate the season, you're going to dedicate the rest of your performances this year to Dak Prescott. That's what you're going to do. Okay, show me, don't tell me. There's all this pushback, all this heat, all this criticism being heaped onto the coaching staff. Mike McCarthy, what are you doing? Mike Nolan, defensive coordinator, what are you doing? Kellen Moore, the offensive coordinator, he doesn't know how to coach. Players anonymously are coming out saying the coaches are unprepared. They don't know what they're doing. Okay, we gave you the excuses in the past. Jason Garrett, oh, he wasn't a good head coach. He's gone. Scott Linehan, he doesn't know how to run offensive plays. He's not getting Ezekiel Elliott the ball enough. Okay, he's out of there. Rod Marinelli, can you really coach a defense? Nope. All right, let's get him out of there. You have gotten up every single coach in Dallas. At some point, when are the players going to take ownership for how much they're playing like garbage right now? When are the players going to be held accountable? When are the players going to be culpable? Is it the coach's fault that your $90 million running back fumbles the ball twice? That puts your defense in a 14-0 deficit that leads to 2 touchdowns for the Cardinals? Is it the defense's fault, or is it the coach's fault that the defense is able to force 3 punts on the 3 straight possessions, and then you try and come back and you fumble the football again? Is it the coach's fault that Michael Gallup drops a touchdown pass from Andy Dalton right at the end of the half that could have cut the deficit to 7-21? Instead, now it's 21-3. You have to settle for a field goal. Is it the coach's fault that DeMarcus Lawrence, who you're paying $100 million to, has only recorded 1 sack and 10 tackles in 6 games this season? At some point, the players just have to step up. The players have to make plays. I'm sick and tired of hearing all these excuses about, the coaches aren't doing enough. The coaches aren't prepared. Well, are you prepared? Believe me, I understand the importance of a coach being able to imbue work ethic, confidence, and a sense of discipline into your team. And we've been able to witness and see its efficacy. We've seen this before. We've seen its effectiveness before. But I don't want to downplay the significance and the importance of coaching, because it's crucial. It's absolutely vital to a team's success, especially in the NFL, where it's illuminated when you see one good coach versus another. But at the same time, again, I understand that coaches can inspire and give uplifting speeches to motivate these players. But at the end of the day, the players got to step up. And I don't even blame Andy Dalton for this. I don't think he's the big issue. Again, is it his fault that Michael Gallup drops a touchdown pass? He threw it right into his hands. He was wide open. What else is the guy supposed to do? So we have to stop this narrative with the Cowboys that it's always the coach's fault. We gave you that excuse. Jason Garrett's out of there. Scott Linehan's out of there. Rod Marinelli is out of there. Players got to be held more accountable, and they just have to step up, period. Ezekiel Elliott, hold on to the damn football. You never turned the ball over in college. That was one of the reasons you were taken so high in the draft, was because you held on to the football. And you were a workhorse. You were an every down kind of back. Now, the Cowboys can take some solace in knowing that the NFC is such trash, and it is so porous and so decayed that even with their current record at 2-4, they can probably finish 7-9 and win the division. I mean, the Eagles are atrocious at 1-4-1. Washington's like 1-4. The Giants are 1-5 or 1-4. So they can probably somehow still win the division, but this is pathetic. Players got to step up. So that's the bottom line. Jacob Perlow, Mayo, poor Cowboys. I can't even make fun of them anymore. Offensive line is hurt terribly too. That's true. Tyron Smith is out, but again, we can't keep using that as an excuse. I'm done hearing this excuse. The players just got to step up. I know Zach Martin is out, but again, even with a poor offensive line, sure, that might limit how many yards Ezekiel Elliott can rush for, but that's not going to account for him fumbling the football. You just have to hold on to the damn football. That's the bottom line. Okay. So I'm going to give you my top 10 teams right now in the NFL, and then coming on the show in about 10-15 minutes, the one and only Ben Cross, college football insider and sports content curator and distributor for NBC Sports' Peacock platform. He's going to be joining me in just around the corner. So, once again, Morning Joe, right here on the Are You Serious Sports Network on Facebook Live, on Twitch TV, and on Twitter. Mondays and Wednesdays, 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 to 11 Central, 8 to 9 a.m. Pacific. Thank you so much for joining me as always and making Are You Serious Sports Network a part of your weekday plans. So, my top 10 teams in the NFL. Here we go. So, at number 10, we got the Arizona Cardinals. Listen, I know what you're thinking. They're 4-2 this year, and they've had some questionable wins. They dominated against Dallas, 38-10. How much should we really make of that win? But they beat the 49ers to start this season. And again, I was thinking about inserting the 49ers into this number 10 spot, but because the Cardinals beat them, I have to have them jump ahead. Kyler Murray has thrown for 1,470 yards, 10 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, completing around 66% of his passes. And again, this Cardinals team can exert some pressure. They can exert some pressure on the opposing quarterbacks. Their defense is around middle of the pack, 11th in total defensive yards. This is a middle of the pack defense, but a top 5 offense in passing yards per game and in total offense. So I like what I'm seeing from the Cardinals. Again, we're going to learn a lot more about them next week against Seattle. That's going to be a really difficult matchup in the NFC West. But right now, and again, this top 10 is fluid. It's constantly changing. And a lot of it's a little bit about the optics, a little bit how it looks like you're playing, and the combination of that with your schedule and just how dominant you've been. And right now, the Arizona Cardinals at 4-2, second in the NFC West. I got to have them at number 10. Now, at number 9, Buffalo Bills. Listen, everyone's freaking out about the Buffalo Bills. Yes, they've lost their last 2 games, but their last 2 games are to teams that have a combined 10-1 record. Chiefs are 5-1. Tennessee is undefeated. Now, I still think the Chiefs are elite, and Ryan Tannehill's playing like an MVP. So if you're Josh Allen and you're Buffalo, listen, you still have a great core right now. Josh Allen is playing like an MVP, 1,711 passing yards. All right, 16 touchdowns, just 4 interceptions, completing 67% of his passes. This is a really good Buffalo Bills team. They were without their star cornerback, Tre'Davious White, and their secondary is really good with him and Josh Norman healthy. So I don't think that we have to freak out just because they lost their last 2 games to teams that are really good. Yes, again, Josh Allen, 85 QBR, which is top 3 in the NFL. So he's still playing well, even though his numbers have dipped slightly the past 2 games. But again, you're talking about losses to the Chiefs and losses to the Tennessee Titans, who I have both in my top 5. That's coming up. Okay, now at number 8, the Chicago Bears. Listen, technically their record could justify them being a little bit higher. I just don't fully buy in completely as a top 5 team, but there's no question you have to give them credit. They're top 10 in total defensive yards. They're a really well-coached team. Matt Nagy is a really savvy head coach. Nick Foles, 3-1 as the starter. They did beat the Buccaneers, and right now this team is a little bit more balanced, I think, with Foles, with that offensive threat, a little bit more than Mitch Trubisky. And you look at their secondary, and it's fantastic. Tayshaun Gibson Jr. is 5th in the NFL in interceptions with 2. He's been playing well. Eddie Jackson, Kyle Fuller, the secondary is great. And then you got Roquan Smith and Danny Trevathan. They get pressure on the opposing quarterback. Khalil Mack is still here. So they've got some pieces on offense. And the bottom line is they're 5-1. And they're 1 in the NFC North right now. However way you want to slice it, they're playing extremely well, and I've got them at number 8. Now, number 7, I got the Green Bay Packers. Now, I know what you're saying. The last time I did these rankings, I had Green Bay in my top 3. The bottom line is optics do matter. Now, there's nothing that I saw from the Green Bay Packers that would suggest to me that they're any different necessarily than they were last season, because I understand that they're pretty much the same team. But when you get shellacked like they did to the Buccaneers 38-10, I'm sorry, I just can't keep you in my top 5, because the top 5 teams haven't, even when they've lost, they haven't just gone absolutely dismantled like that. And Aaron Rodgers is still an MVP candidate. I haven't backed off of that. He's still playing really well, but there's still question marks now with their offensive line. David Bakhtiari had to leave the game. All right, he's not there anymore. And I just need to see more from them. They got outscored 38-0 after the second quarter. I just need to see more from the Green Bay Packers. So right now, when you lose like that, they're still 4-1, second in the NFC North behind the Bears. But when you lose like that, I can't keep you in my top 10. Or rather, in my top 5. They're still in my top 10. Okay. Number 6, the Baltimore Ravens. This team should be a top 3 team. They just haven't been playing that consistently right now. When you look at this team from top to bottom, they're still stacked. Lamar Jackson, the reigning MVP. His numbers have dipped a little bit, completing only 63% of his passes, not quite as efficient with the football, still a great runner, but defenses are starting to hone in on his running ability and force him to pass. And the bottom line is, when you let an Eagles team, a depleted Eagles team, nearly pull off a fourth quarter comeback the way that they did, and you have to hold on to a 30-28 win, again, against a depleted Eagles team who Carson Wentz had no weapons to throw to, that just doesn't sit well with me. And again, a win is a win, so I still have them at number 6, but I can't put them right now in the top 5 purely based on how they've been playing. Again, it's really important how you look, the manner in which you're winning football games is really important to me. And right now, the Baltimore Ravens will probably jump back in. They're just not looking quite as dominant as they have been at 5-1. Second in the AFC North. Okay, now entering the top 5. Here we go. Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Listen, this is going to be one of those teams that probably vacillates the most, fluctuates the most, right? Because one week they lose to the Bears, the next week they dominate the Packers. But the truth of the matter is they've got the number 1 defense in the NFL right now. Number 1 in total defensive yards allowed, number 1 against the rush, number 2 in sacks. They're top 10 against the pass. They get pressure on opposing quarterbacks, and Dominic Sue had a resurgence against the Packers. He was fantastic. Jason Pierre-Paul got a couple sacks on Aaron Rodgers. So this defense is really good. And now Tom Brady, still very efficient, still very effective. Now you're starting to ingratiate Rob Gronkowski into the offense. We know about the pieces with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin already. So this Tampa Bay Buccaneers team is for real. And I know they're 4-2, and some other teams have a better record than them. But when I just look at the eye test and my gut feeling right now, I have to put them in my top 5. Brady had emphasized changing the culture. He wanted to establish more discipline and view a better work ethic and a better mindset into his players. Well, they're responding. Last week or 10 days ago, they committed 11 penalties against the Bears. They come back committing only 0 penalties against the Packers with 0 turnovers. So they're number 5. Okay. Number 4 is the Pittsburgh Steelers. Listen, I've been reluctant to put them in my top 5 for so long, but at some point, the facts are the facts. This team's 5-0, first in the NFC North. Their defense is menacing. Have you seen their linebacking core? Good God, I would not want to be facing this linebacking core right now. They're number 1 in sacks, number 2 against the rush, number 2 in total defense. I mean, Bud Dupree, top 5 in the NFL with sacks with 5. TJ Watt is a monster. Then you have Minkah Fitzpatrick again in the secondary as a safety. And Big Ben is playing about as consistently as he's ever played in his career, completing 69% of his passes. Nothing too crazy, about 1,200 passing yards, 11 touchdowns, just 1 interception, which was a consistent issue for Big Ben in the past. So he's playing about as under control as we've ever hoped and expected for. And the Steelers defense just well coached, and they're 5-0. And so right now they deserve to be in the top 5 at number 4. Now, to number 3, the Tennessee Titans. Listen, they're number 1 in rushing yards per game. Derrick Henry leads the NFL with 588 rushing yards, not to mention baptizing guys like Josh Norman along the way. RIP to Josh Norman, because that was a nasty stiff arm a couple weeks ago against the Bills. The bottom line is they're 5-0. All right, they've collected big wins along the way. They have the best turnover differential at +6 so far this year, and Ryan Tannehill's playing like an MVP quarterback. 13 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. His QBR is 83. That's 4th best in the NFL right now, over 1,300 yards. 2nd in the NFL in total offensive yards per game. Think about this team from last year. When you looked at this team last year, no one was saying to themselves, oh, yeah, this looks like a top 5 offense to me. No, this looked like one guy in Derrick Henry who put on the most impressive postseason run, rattling off a 188-yard rushing game against the Pats. Then a 211 rushing yard game, or first against the Ravens, then against the Pats. This guy has been a monster, but Ryan Tannehill's been playing well. Mike Vrabel's coached this team well. They've had a nice addition of Jadeveon Clowney. And so this is a really good football team. And right now, I didn't fully buy into them, but after the past 2 weeks, they look like a top 3 team. At number 2, the Seattle Seahawks, 5-0. Listen, they just had a bye week, okay, but Russell Wilson is still an MVP candidate. They're top 5 in total offense, in passing yards, rather. They're 7th against the rush. No, their defense is not the same, but again, they're undefeated, and I just believe in Russell Wilson. In Russ, I trust, right? That's the expression. So this guy has been legit. He's been fantastic. Finally, Pete Carroll has relinquished his offense to this guy, and you're seeing the dividends. This guy has been fantastic, and he's really the sole reason why this team, I have them at number 2, because, again, their defense hasn't been great, but they're good against the rush, and the bottom line is when you have a guy in Russell Wilson who can cover up for all your mistakes, if you keep winning, I'm going to have no choice but to put you at number 2. So they're 5-0 atop the NFC West. Now the NFC West starts to get going, and so I'm curious to see how they're going to respond. But right now, coming off the bye week, big matchup against Arizona and the Cardinals coming up. I'm curious to see how the Seahawks are going to do, but I have them at number 2. Now, at number 1, Kansas City Chiefs. Listen, But Jonah, you talked about optics. I know. But if you watch the Chiefs, you just have to look at the eye test, man. What's your gut feeling? Would you really bet on any other team in a single game elimination versus the Chiefs right now? Because I wouldn't. Patrick Mahomes has been an MVP candidate, 15 touchdowns, 1 interception, nearly 1,700 yards, efficient throwing the football, 66% completion percentage. They've got wins versus the Bills, the Ravens, and the Patriots. Top 3 in total offensive yards. And again, you just look at this team, and it's hard to say based on the eye test that this team shouldn't be number 1. Yeah, I know they lost 1 game to the Raiders. I don't care at all. Because who would you take? Who would you take over the Chiefs right now? So the bottom line is they're my number 1 team right now. That's been Jonah's top 10 teams. Once again, Morning Joe right here on the Are You Serious Sports Network on Facebook Live, on Twitch TV, and on Twitter. Hashtag JMalk, hashtag MJ, hashtag Morning Joe. Comment your favorite type of coffee that you have, your favorite type of Joe in the morning. That's what we do here at the Morning Joe. I want to give you a shout out. If you do, it's got to be creative, right? We're interested in eclectic types. And now, coming up, I'm excited to present. Now, joining the show is my friend and my one of my good buddies, but also more importantly, he's a sports content curator and distributor at NBC Sports on their Peacock platform and a college football insider, Ben Cross. Ben, thank you so much, first of all, for joining me. Let's get started with this, Ben. So the highly anticipated return of the Big Ten football is this Friday. Wisconsin opens up this Friday against Illinois at Camp Randall. Obviously, the Pac-12 is returning November 7th in a couple of weeks. Let's start with this. Given how unprecedented it is that 3 of the conferences are already entering week 8, and the Big Ten is essentially entering their week 1 of the season, how important do you think style points, dominance, and just the manner in which the elite teams in the Big Ten, like the Ohio States, like the Penn States, like the Wisconsins, win and enter the fold in the eyes of the committee? How important are style points going to be for this Big Ten conference right out of the gates in week 1, given that the committee has only been able to evaluate 3 conferences so far?
Well, it's undeniable that it's important. I mean, obviously, if you're going to have less games on the schedule, you want to look more impressive approaching the playoff committee's decision at the end of the year. But I don't think it's as important as everyone thinks it is. I think if you look down the road, you're starting to see a lot of these teams. Georgia lost to Bama. You see Auburn get pretty much eliminated from contention. A lot of those fringe SEC teams that you would normally consider around the end of the year are no longer in contention. They're just dropping like flies. The Big 12 is still out. I mean, if Oklahoma State loses, the Big 12 is almost eliminated from the playoff, regardless of if you have some relatively suspect Big 10 teams there towards the end of the year. I think the Pac-12 is almost out of luck. I mean, you look at Oregon, they could go undefeated and potentially have a chance, but I don't think they have enough games on their schedule. I think for the Big Ten, if they're able to play the 8-game schedule, now that's a big if. I mean, we saw with Michigan, Minnesota, the Michigan Health Department shut down the campus. Everyone had to stay in place for 2 weeks approaching this game, but they came out and said that didn't apply to student athletes. But if anything comes up like that, then the Big Ten is done. I don't see them really having any chance. But if they're able to get in those 8 games, I don't necessarily think they need to blow everyone out of the water. I just think they need to have one undefeated team who runs the table and wins the Big Ten championship. Now, obviously, the odds-on favorite to do that would be Ohio State. You could also see Penn State pulling it off, and our alma mater, Wisconsin, has a chance if you look at the playoff predictor. But I don't necessarily think it is absolutely crucial that the team that comes out of the Big Ten blows everyone out. I think it's more crucial that they're undefeated, because if you look at who's considered for the playoff right now, it's not as deep of a field as it normally is. A lot of these strong teams are losing, and you have maybe one contender, Clemson, obviously in the ACC, and the SEC, you have Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Auburn, LSU have all pretty much dropped off the map. It now comes down to, I think, if you're talking about a Big Ten team contending, just go undefeated. You want to look flashy in some big games, have some big moments, but just go undefeated. I think that's the most important.
Okay, now let's transition to the Pac-12 in this sense. Their season begins November 7th. They're only playing a 6-game conference schedule. Even with, Ben, a team like Oregon, who we think is probably the best team right now in the Pac-12, do they have enough games to play? Are 6 games enough to impress the committee to the point where they would insert an Oregon over a 2-loss SEC team, a 1-loss SEC team, or even a 1-loss Big Ten team? Are 6 games enough for the Pac-12?
It's not. I think if the Big Ten wasn't playing or the Big Ten was on the same level as far as how many games they were going to be played, maybe. But 6 games is just not enough. I'd say the only way that a Pac-12 team gets in is if they're going up against 2-loss, possibly even 3-loss teams from the SEC or Big Ten or ACC in this instance. And Oregon is the team. They go undefeated and blow everyone out. I mean, you talked about the eye test with the Big Ten. Oregon has to be the team because they are the team going into the year with the highest expectations. In other years, you could argue USC because I think they have a lot of talent and Slovis is a great quarterback, but it has to be Oregon this year. They won the Rose Bowl this last year. They're coming in with some expectations. They would have to be the team. They'd have to run the table. They'd have to blow everyone out in those 6 games, and then they would have to have other teams lose. I think 2 losses, they would be considered if they did all those things, but I still think they're on the outside looking in, and I think the Pac-12 just doesn't have a chance this year. I think 6 is not enough, and I'm not necessarily 8 is the magic number with the Big Ten, but there's a much better chance, I think, when you go from 6 to 8, potentially 9 with the Big Ten championship game.
Okay, now I'm going to shift to a slightly sensitive topic. I know they're not totally your Georgia Bulldogs, but I have to say, we watched Alabama against Georgia over the weekend. Now, granted, in fairness to the Bulldogs, this game was in Tuscaloosa, but I got to tell you, listen, I'd been a believer in Stetson Bennett. After that game, when we talked, he started to play well. He threw 3 interceptions. Now, I know it's not entirely his fault, and the Georgia defense still looked great in the first half. They led 24-20, but this offense struggled. The Alabama defense stepped up, and they blew them out in the second half, 21-0 in the second half to win 41-24. So right now, there's something about Nick Saban and his disciples and his former assistants. They can't win a game. Everyone dubbed Kirby Smart, hey, this is going to be the best assistant that he's ever had. And he's 0-3 right now against Nick Saban. Now, again, in fairness to him, this game was in Tuscaloosa. The SEC championship game he lost in 2018. That's a neutral site, which ironically was the game that Hurts took over for Tua. And in 2017, it flopped. Again, for the national championship, neutral site, and Tua takes over for Jalen Hurts. How much do you think a loss like this should be placed on to Kirby Smart? I mean, is it his fault that his team wasn't able to perform? Because the bottom line, Ben, is if you look at the recruiting, Georgia's had the number 1 recruiting class for a couple years, and yet as talented as their defense is, and I'm still all in on their defense, it is menacing. It is fantastic. And at some point, there's only so long that defense can contain such an explosive offense like Alabama. But what are your thoughts on Georgia after watching this kind of second half collapse to the Tide in Tuscaloosa?
Well, Georgia's not a bad team at all, and I don't necessarily heap this loss on Kirby Smart. I think there were 2 different tiers on that field, and Georgia played a great first half, and you talk about the talent that they have. The one position they don't have talent, or they don't have over-the-top talent, 5-star talent, is at quarterback. They have JT Daniels on the bench, but Stetson played as well as you'd expect Stetson to play. The only unfortunate thing is there were those 3 interceptions, 2 of which I didn't necessarily think were his fault. So it comes down to an unfortunate swing, but Georgia needed everything to go right for them. We are in a different SEC now. If you look at the defensive stats, it is no longer about defense. I think the SEC cumulative defense is the worst out of the Power 5 and possibly even a few other conferences this year. You need to have a dominant offense, and Alabama does. Mac Jones is just better than Stetson Bennett. Georgia has great receivers. They have great running backs. Those players showed up on Saturday. It just wasn't necessarily the quarterback that put them over the top. Stetson's fine. He's a game manager, but he needs to deliver the deep ball consistently. And that's just not in Georgia's playbook right now. And that's not necessarily on Kirby. He needs to get a quarterback like JT Daniels in there who can show up and dominate down the field, be a Joe Burrow, Mac Jones type, which is tough to find. But at Georgia, they need to, project this for the future. And which is unfortunate when you consider the quarterbacks that they've recruited. I mean, they recruited Justin Fields. They recruited, Trevor Lawrence, guys like that just didn't end up working for them and didn't end up in the starting role for them. So I think you look at Georgia, they were outmatched from a specific matchups perspective. Alabama's offense is just too unstoppable, no matter how good Georgia's defense is. Georgia's defense, in my opinion, is still the best in the country, but they're just in a different league than they used to be in that the SEC is just all offense now, and they needed to be able to respond with their offense, and they weren't able to do that in the second half. That being said, I would still pick Clemson in a matchup with Alabama because I think Alabama showed some major holes in their defense in the first half, and they've shown that throughout the season to this point. I think that game's going to be an absolute shootout, and I think Clemson has the upper hand because of their defense. So I think you look at Georgia, not a bad team at all. I still like them to run the rest of the table in the SEC East and play Alabama again. I just think they were outmatched that day, and it comes down to the quarterback position. They need someone more talented, someone who can push the ball down the field. They have the receivers, they have the weapons. It's all there for them. They just need the quarterback.
Man, if Georgia had Justin Fields right now, the way he's playing,
might be a different discussion.
It might be a different discussion. I agree.
They were winning in the first half with Stetson in there.
Right. Okay. You mentioned Clemson. Let's stick with them. Trevor Lawrence threw his first interception in the last 366 passes. Hard to fathom. This is the first time he threw for over 400 yards, 5 touchdowns in the first half. Clemson used a rotation of 4 quarterbacks in that game. They won their largest margin of victory in the ACC ever, 73-7 to Georgia Tech. So they have a matchup in South Bend against Notre Dame coming up, number 3 in the country technically, according to the AP Top 25, on November 7th. Here's my problem, Ben. Notre Dame just barely beat Louisville, a 1-4 team, 12-7. Now, again, without obviously the Big Ten isn't part of this right now. Right now, the AP is just ranking the teams that they've seen. Is Notre Dame the best matchup, the best challenger in the ACC to Clemson? Because to me, I just don't even see them as being necessarily a big threat right now, given how they looked against Louisville and how dominant Clemson's been.
This last week was a big shot to the ACC. Not only did Notre Dame barely beat Louisville, and if you watch that game, Notre Dame got some lucky breaks towards the end of that game. Louisville very well could have won that game. And then UNC loses to an unranked Florida State, who was possibly overranked at number 5 in the country. Those two teams struggling this last week looks really bad on the ACC, but if you're talking about Clemson, it's not going to hurt their reputation at all. As far as competition for the rest of the year, I don't really see anything standing in their way. They're not going to play UNC in the regular season anyway. They already beat Miami easy. And then they have Notre Dame coming up, who really doesn't look all that good. In South Bend's not an easy matchup, but at the same time, Notre Dame does not look like a top 5 team right now. And I very well expect them to get their lunch pail handed to them by Clemson in a big way. I mean, you watch Clemson this last week. I couldn't believe the stats coming out of that. I checked in on that game at halftime. Looking at the stat sheet, it looked like Trevor Lawrence had one of the best full games of the year, and he did it in the first half. They're coming into form, and that's really scary for college football. It's really scary for the teams they have ahead of them, Notre Dame being one of them.
So let's stick right there with that, because to me, I think that Alabama and Clemson are in a category by themselves out of the teams that we've seen so far. And I think that Georgia is right on the fringe, right outside. And I guess I got to throw Notre Dame in there because there's no one else that's been played. We've already seen Texas A&M. I don't really view them as a top 5 team right now. In your mind, obviously not. You don't have to give a specific order, but out of the teams that have played, what's your kind of top 5 right now based on the first couple weeks of the season?
Top five, I think you got to go with Clemson with number one. They haven't had the toughest schedule. They haven't had to play the top 10 teams that Bama has, but they've looked all that much more impressive, and we know what Clemson can do when they go up against top teams. So I like Clemson with my number one right now. Alabama coming in number two, dominant performance in the second half against Georgia. They're looking like they're coming into form. Their offense is absolutely explosive. They haven't lost a step without Tua. That's a very, very impressive transition. Nick Saban now COVID-free and immune for the next few months. That's something to keep an eye on. Number three is a really interesting discussion. I think from a power rankings perspective, I think you give it to Georgia. They've looked good in instances in the last few weeks. There haven't necessarily been any other teams. I don't like Notre Dame. I think they're showing flashes of the past where they just play close games and they squeak them out and they get benefits by being undefeated and rolling against inferior opponents. I think you go Georgia with number three. I think you can throw Notre Dame at number four. Texas A&M's an interesting team, but there's really not all that much out there. I think Florida still has a chance to be a decent team. They obviously sat out this last week with the LSU game getting postponed and all their players contracting COVID. So you hope for the health of their squad. I think they looked good outside of their loss a few weeks ago. So I think you got to throw Florida in the mix. But beyond that, I think after the top two teams, there's really a big drop off. I would not be surprised in any way, shape, or form if Ohio State comes out against Nebraska this week and puts their name in that tier. But I think right now it's Clemson, Alabama, Ohio State soon to be there, and then everyone else.
Yeah, I'll follow up with Ohio State in the Big Ten after they play with you. So right now, I just want to focus on the teams that have played. Very quickly, we got a couple more minutes. Transitioning to the NFL briefly. Dolphins just announced that Tua is going to be their starter moving forward. Taking over for Ryan Fitzpatrick in the AFC East. They're 3-3 right now, second in the AFC East right now, ahead of the Patriots, right behind the Bills. How much do you think this decision is based on the way that he's looked in practice, that he's ready, versus how the organization has seen, hey, listen, Justin Herbert, they threw him out there with the Chargers. He's playing really well. Joe Burrow with Cincinnati's playing really well. How much do you think it's, okay, Tua's just ready to play, versus we've seen how some of these other rookie quarterbacks have come in and have been productive right out of the gates? Why do you think the Dolphins decided to make this move at this particular time?
It's a baffling decision to me. I sure hope that it was based on what Tua has done in practice, because all we've seen in actual gameplay is Ryan Fitzpatrick winning games. They are leading their division right now, which isn't necessarily what it was when Tom Brady was in New England, but it's still a good division. The Bills are in that division. They're leading the division. It makes little to no sense that they would make this change now, especially after a blowout win. I mean, it's fine if they want to give Tua a chance to prove himself, but you have Ryan Fitzpatrick playing as good as he possibly can, and we don't necessarily know if that's a guarantee for the future. So I think you get as many wins as you can out of Fitzpatrick and let Tua continue to develop. We saw him come in at the end of this last game, and then he had that moment after the game where he sat on the field and it looked like he was reflecting on the fact that he was just able to come in relief in an NFL game. That is a special moment for him, and I think they had a good thing going. I don't understand why you would just throw him out there now. I understand if you might want to trade snaps and trade drives, bring him in and out, but to say he's the unequivocal starter right now is really confusing to me when they're in such a good position, and I haven't seen anything. I mean, we saw him in this last game. He looked fine, but he threw, 9 passes max? I don't think there was really anything you saw on that tape that said, this guy is so much better than the guy we have winning games right now. And if you're going to replace a guy who's winning games, the guy on the bench better be the next Hall of Famer, the next, quarterback passing leader in the NFL. And I haven't seen that from Tua. I hope they've seen something in practice, because otherwise this is just a very, very confusing move to me.
Okay, final question, then I'll let you go. I want you to try and be concise about this, because I know you could go on for hours and hours. What's wrong with the Cowboys, man? Listen, at some point, you can blame as many coaches as you want. They got Jason Garrett fired. Scott Linehan's gone. Rod Marinelli's gone. Okay, you can't keep, and I understand that Mike Nolan's not the best defensive coordinator. I get that. Maybe Kellen Moore could have utilized Ezekiel Elliott a little bit better. Maybe Mike McCarthy can motivate his guys a little bit better. But at some point, you can't keep blaming the coaches. Ezekiel Elliott fumbles the football twice. Is that Mike McCarthy's fault? Is it Mike McCarthy's fault that Michael Gallup drops a touchdown pass from Andy Dalton right before the half that could have cut the deficit to 7 to 21? Is it the coach's fault that DeMarcus Lawrence, who you're paying $100 million to, has only recorded 1 sack and 10 tackles in 6 games this season? I mean, at what point, Ben, do the players just have to take more ownership and be held more accountable? I mean, what's your thoughts? You're a big-time Cowboys fan. What's your thoughts on what's been transpiring this season for them?
Well, it's very telling that the players have come out against the coaches, but I think everyone should take ownership. I think the reality is, if you break down the coaching staff, no one is doing a good job. You look a few years ago, their defense was in a much, much better place. Their offensive line was in a much, much better place. They lose some of those coordinators. They're gone. That's fine. But their new coaches haven't done anything to prove themselves either. I don't like any of Mike Nolan's schemes. I think you look at Kellen Moore's offensive coordinator. He hasn't changed anything since Jason Garrett left. But then you look to the players, and you're right. They are making mistakes. Even if those things go their way, I still don't think they're competing against an Arizona Cardinals team who's, in all fairness, pretty average this year. You might have a different opinion on that. I know you had them in their your top 10 rankings. But regardless, I think everyone is at fault right now. The defense is an absolute mess. Obviously, lose Dak Prescott. That's incredibly unfortunate. You hope for his recovery and health. Andy Dalton didn't necessarily look comfortable in the offense. Not necessarily his fault, given that it was his first week and he only had 1 week of practice. But regardless, everyone is at fault in this organization right now. And I don't want to see people pointing fingers. They just need to come together as a unit and figure it out, which they're just not doing right now.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Ben Cross, joining the show, college football insider, and of course, sports content and contributor and curator and distributor on NBC Sports' Peacock platform. Ben, always a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for joining the show.
Of course. Thanks, Jonah.
All right. Ben Cross, always happy to have him. Final segment of the day for just a minute. Malkin's Moments. Had another good one this week. I was excited about this. So the Dodgers won Game 1 of the World Series against the Tampa Bay Rays. Cody Bellinger in the bottom of the 4th inning hits a 2-run home run, and now we see an altered celebration from Cody Bellinger. In Game 7 against the Braves, he went in elbow to elbow, popped his shoulder out. I think maybe dislocated his shoulder. Now in Game 1 of the World Series, after the 2-run homer to put the Dodgers up 2-0 in the bottom of the 4th, he goes with a foot tap celebration with all the players. So that was one of my favorite moments to see. I'm glad it's a much more shrewd move from Cody Bellinger. And again, Dodgers up 1-0 in the World Series. So that's going to do it for us today on Morning Joe. Thank you so much for joining me. This is Morning Joe right here on the Are You Serious Sports Network on Facebook Live, on Twitch TV, and on Twitter every Monday and Wednesday morning from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 to 11 Central, and 8 to 9 a.m. Pacific. Thank you so much for joining me on a lovely Wednesday morning. And as always, have a lovely rest of your morning.